English translation 895th contact. Thursday, 15th August 2024, 6:43 hours.
Greetings and welcome. But before we start our conversation, I want to give you the following article to read because I know, because you once asked me about it, that you are interested in what is still being written about Nagasaki and Hiroshima in the media here on Earth today. I want to say that actually nothing is being done in this regard anymore. But here in Infosperber, something has been published and brought up that has actually been forgotten by all governments and populations and media of all states long ago. This is probably because this war crime and crime against humanity by America is supposed to be forgotten, as humanity is also completely irresponsible and indifferent to everything and is also so America-friendly. That everything criminal about America, including its criminal hegemony, is excused, and it is still helped with regard to its crimes. This is how it is done. For example, in the war in Ukraine, which is solely due to America's guilt and which, in the background, is the reason for the war in Ukraine, for which the lowly, intelligent, and simple-minded war fanatic Zelensky is carrying out America's secret orders. He can do this by irresponsible arms deliveries from America, as well as by all the all-round idiotic, partisan and America-friendly governments and all the stupid and arms-delivering parts of the population of around 50 America-hungry states that supply money and weapons to Zelensky. That you can now read the article from Infosperber, how I specifically bring it into our conversation, and want to publish it so that the human beings learn what elements of America's government and military power have done and committed since its existence in terms of hundreds of thousandfold, as well as millions of murders calculated in total, and with regard to the crippling and destruction of human beings and other crimes, and continues to commit throughout the world, and that is something that America-friendly human beings should also learn about. This applies above all to those lowly intelligent people who see everything American as bread and honey, but not their lies, deceit, and hegemonic behavior. Of course, not all American people can be involved in these evil and despicable machinations, because there are also many people in America who do not agree with the thoughts and actions of those government birds who are going against every right, every decency, freedom, life, and humanity in a criminal and also criminal manner. This, as they also do with the actions of the military power and its like-minded people, supporters and advocates from the people, with all the other unpleasant things that are done and caused by the American government. The American Army and the U.S. Secret Services all over the world, such as evil, murderous, destructive, and thus criminal destruction of human life and other crimes and disasters. Now, those who are pro-American should be made aware of this and realize that, with their pro-Americanism, they are jubilantly glorifying many murderous government criminals, military criminals and Secret Service criminals, and, as a result, are making themselves conscious or unconscious accomplices and also criminals and, under certain circumstances, guilty of murder. And all because all the adulation regarding the land of America, where gold and honey are said to flow, has been misunderstood. The righteous Americans, however, and that means human beings, turn away from everything that has to do with the creation of suffering, misery, need, destruction, and annihilation, and from America and its government, military and secret services, as well as from crazy religions and religious sects, and from American criminal organizations, and from all similar evils and other crimes spread throughout the earth. And this has been going on since America waged the unfortunate War of Independence from 1775 to 1783, when George Washington, as the first president of America in the war, shot and thus murdered a negotiator armed with a white flag before he could even speak. And America has kept quiet about this evil murder to this day, and has maintained the whys of its criminal actions, spreading them worldwide, and, in its crazy and insane delusion of hegemony, expanding them without mercy into worldwide mass murder. And this is irresponsibly endorsed and tolerated by all the incompetent and crazy rulers of many states on Earth and by insane sections of the population, which I denounce over and over again. And the reason why this is tolerated by practically all countries worldwide is only out of fear that America could somehow secretly and deviously strike through its secret services or military and unleash war, for example, deviously via another military power, as for example in Ukraine, where Russia was politically harassed for so long by the Democrats of America. of which the senile president still presides to this day, who, contrary to all the dishonest agreements and negotiations in the 1990s, wanted to bring NATO into Ukraine. As a result of the failed political negotiations that Russian President Putin and his staff conducted with America, respectively mainly with Biden, Russia lost patience and started the war in Ukraine. And that this war is now to be continued, insidiously and deviously controlled and financed by America, is undoubtedly what the now mobilized presidential candidate Kamala Harris wants to ensure, who in her evil mendacity, deceit, and attitude is mocking the people of the Democrats, as I see it. Consequently, the American Democrats are mainly to blame for what is to come.
You should not talk openly about that, dear friend. Hello to you too, dear friend. And you have a lot to say before we could greet each other correctly, and I could tell you that our lion will visit you today, and
I also do not, because when I retrieve the conversation and write it down respectively, I put dots. I do not do politics with it, I just name what is around. But that is held against me, and it is claimed that I do politics with it. But I really do not. I just say what is fact.
I know that. Furthermore, it could be regulated via the High Council, that from now on the wrong-term spirit can be changed to the required correct form of creation energy in every written and spoken form. And consequently, the code will be correct. But what you have here in an article seems to me to be very important and revealing. And I can only agree with what you say, but I will have more to say about that later, because it is not urgent. So let me read.
Please, but we still have to discuss the High Council. It also has some pictures, and because I want to show you this article, and I think that it should be spread as far as possible throughout the world, I have called you. I also want to publish it in the first special sign of the Times for September, and hope that it will be read diligently all over the world, and finally open the eyes of many human beings to what America, in its completely irresponsible, warlike, and murderous delusion of hegemony, is doing and allowing and never being held accountable for in terms of meanness and crimes against humanity.
But that is quite a lot. I will need some time to get through it all.
Take your time, there is no rush. Besides, I find that you can remember things better by reading slowly. At least that is my experience, because I already learned from Svath to read slowly, and also when I should be in a hurry, or am rushed to read quickly. The same would result for humanity, because due to the very rapid development of technology, humanity has fallen behind in the development of consciousness in its character, actions, behavior, learning, independence, and with regard to education and effective, valuable knowledge, etc., to such an extent that degeneration, respectively, degeneration and primitiveness is spreading. As a result, hatred is also increasing and leading more and more to spitefulness and acts of murder.
Unfortunately, this is the case, and our forecasts indicate that in the future, this will become increasingly vicious and will not even protect human lives from being murdered. Caution is also advised for yourself, and not only in the center, so you should also keep away from visitors of any kind for your own protection outside the center. This is also necessary for the FIGU members in the area of the center for their own safety, because they are not immune to possible attacks either, because we have identified certain threats that unfortunately arise. This is unfortunately the case because the truth does not want to be heard and should not be spread, because it is very damaging to all beliefs and to falsehood, both religious and secular, and to all of America's worldwide criminal and hegemonic machinations. This, as well as a secret and, in my opinion, treacherous sense of which I understand as treason, but which is kept from you by, namely that, and you should now know this, because it is necessary for you, and that is because that you, with regard to trust, have no, but now I want to, but here you should change this italics. It is not good to read it. Also the names mentioned here you should arrange on the left side, because on the right side is not good. I will then scan the whole thing and also distribute it on ERA for information.
There is nothing to prevent that now, so I will do it then and make the changes. And what you are telling me regarding That actually seems to be the case to me, because on various occasions I will just put full stops in the conversation transcripts for what was said in this regard.
That will be necessary because then regarding this, please also apply my wish to the time signal because it is all not formatted very well. And please make the whole thing a bit more compact, without these unnecessary spaces, and the images should be larger, also for the special time signal that I then want to copy. Please do it as I show you here, but now I want to read.
Do that, and you will be amazed at what the Infosperber brings to light in its article report. Even though around 80 years have passed since the events of that time, what America did in Japan during the last World War in terms of evil and horrific war crimes and crimes against humanity cannot and must not be ignored. And it has never been held accountable for them, not even to the slightest degree.
Infosperber sees what others miss. Sunday, 11th of August, 2024.
Photograph of a severely burnt human being from 8th August 1945, 2 days after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Copyright Public Domain Onuka, Masami via Wikimedia Commons.
Tactical atomic bombs and their cruel consequences. The international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons describes what children in Hiroshima and Nagasaki experienced. Martina Fry, 11.08. 2024.
On the anniversary of the US atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons (ICAN) reminds us of what atomic bombs do to children. The ICAN report begins with a warning. This report contains vivid stories, illustrations and photos of extreme violence against children, detailed descriptions of injuries, suffering and death of children, references to mental illness, suicide and neglect of children, as well as stories of harm inflicted on pregnant women that led to miscarriages and stillbirths.
A boy burnt in Nagasaki. He was probably 13-year-old Shoji Tanizaki. Many victims could no longer be identified. Copyright Yamahata Yosuke via Wikimedia Commons Public Domain.
Whenever I think of Hiroshima, the first image that comes to mind is my 4-year-old nephew Eiji, his little body turned into a lump of flesh, melted beyond recognition. In a weak voice, he kept asking for water until death released him. Setsuko Thurlow, 13 years old at the time of the atomic bomb explosion, everything I could see was destroyed. Children were crying for their mothers. Charred bodies were strewn all over the city. Many human beings lost their arms or legs. Lee Soo-yong, 15 years old, I found my older sister barely recognizable among the dying and dead. Her face was swollen and burnt. A girl in Nagasaki, a mother rocked her baby without a head and cried. Little barefoot children crouched in the ruins or ran past corpses, calling for their mothers and fathers. Susan Southard, author of Nagasaki, Life After Nuclear War, his entire skin had come off, leaving a red, naked body. If it had not been for my intuition, I would probably have denied that this was my child. Yasuo Yamamoto on seeing his son, who died the next day. A young couple, the woman's clothes torn from her body, both covered in blood, held a bleeding baby and pleaded for help to find a second child who had been lost under the rubble. James Ann Yamazaki, author of Children of the Atomic Bomb. These quotes are taken from the recently published report, The Impact of Nuclear Weapons on Children by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons (ICAN). ICAN received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000. According to ICAN, an estimated 38,000 children died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as a direct result of the atomic bombs being dropped. In addition, countless children succumbed to radiation-related leukemia or other radiation-related illnesses years later. Iwao Nakanishi, who was 15 at the time, remembered a little boy screaming for help. The little boy had lost both eyes. I grabbed his arm and tried to help him stand up. His flesh came off and I let go. I can never forget it. I regret that I did not take him on my back and save him. Iwao Nakanishi, 15 years old. The surviving children provided further harrowing eyewitness accounts. They saw the charred remains of their siblings and parents, classmates with their eyeballs bursting out of their eye sockets, streets full of dead and dying.
A terrible sight, those killed in the fireball of the atomic bomb explosion. Ezero iwu nyan ba yueliuri, esbn juchiba, tosivu bawu, toerchi, zero san, via Wikimedia Commons public domain.
Even tactical nuclear bombs have a greater effect than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The atomic bomb known as Little Boy, which was detonated over Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945, had an explosive force of around 13 kilotons of TNT. While the atomic bomb known as Fat Man, which was dropped on Nagasaki 2 days later, had an explosive force of around 21 kilotons. By way of comparison, according to the German news program ARD Tagesschau, the tactical nuclear weapons that have been frequently mentioned recently generally have an explosive force of between 0.3 and over 50 kilotons of TNT. In 2013, the German Federal Agency for Civic Education explained in an article, the US bombs stored in Europe have a variably adjustable explosive yield of 0.3 to 50 kilotons Model 4, or 0.3 to 170 kilotons Model 3.
Escalation of nuclear rhetoric.
There are currently almost 4,000 nuclear warheads deployed worldwide, as reported by Infosperber. As recently as August 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin wrote to the participants of the then Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference in New York, "We assume that there can be no winners in a nuclear war, and that it must never be started. However, Icon Germany is seeing an escalation of nuclear rhetoric, not only in Russia but also in Israel and North Korea. Almost every week, Kremlin politicians or propagandists threaten on state television with a conventional or even nuclear retaliatory strike against NATO," reported the German TV channel ZDF recently. Russia had only in May held tactical nuclear weapons exercises near the Ukrainian border, said the ARD. NATO. Secretary General Stoltenberg said in June that NATO was considering making more nuclear weapons deployable. As early as October 2023, NATO played through the nuclear war scenario NNZZ. Nuclear forces, as of January 2024, estimate by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute SIPRI. Left column, number of deployed warheads mounted on missiles or at bases. Middle column, deployed warheads and those that could be deployed. Right column, all warheads, including those decommissioned and awaiting dismantlement. See SIPRI Yearbook 2024. At a preparatory meeting for the 11th Review Conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty NPT, the Chinese representative proposed in July 24 that all 5 official nuclear weapon states, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom should renounce the first use of nuclear weapons by treaty, reports Presenza. But the US and NATO have so far refused to take this step. Former German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer-Greens called for a European nuclear scheme. The NZZ commented, "It is better to have a nuclear bomb than none at all." Anyone reading the Icahn report comes to the opposite conclusion. The nuclear powers should urgently start disarmament negotiations. The difficult task of mutual verification of arms limitations and disarmament is easier to achieve with modern monitoring capabilities. Inventory of nuclear weapons in January 2024 according to SIPRE estimates. Each point symbolizes 10 nuclear warheads. Red, warheads deployed. Dark grey, warheads in storage that could potentially be deployed after a certain amount of preparation. Light grey, warheads decommissioned. See SIPRE Yearbook 2024.
Almost 2 kilometers from the explosion, 4 years in hospital.
A victim of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. This human being died 4 weeks after this photo was taken. Chun Jubaichi Shi and Nyansan Usan Shi Yi Li, via Wikimedia Commons public domain.
"16-year-old Sumiteru Taniguchi was riding his bicycle 1.8 kilometers from the site of the bomb explosion when the blast threw him to the ground. When he raised his head again, he saw that all the children who had been playing around him were dead. Sumiteru suffered severe burns. He spent almost 4 years in hospital, almost 2 years of which he spent only in a prone position. During this time, he developed deep pressure ulcers and skin wounds from lying down.
For 21 months, Sumiteru Taniguchi was only able to lie on his front because of his severe burns, and he had to stay in hospital for almost 4 years. The recording is from a color film shot by U.S. soldiers. Copyright team of Lieutenant Daniel A. McGovern and Lieutenant Herbert Susan, via Wikimedia Commons public domain.
The then 13-year-old Setsuko Thurlow described bombing victims who had parts of their bodies missing, whose eyeballs hung in their hands, and whose stomachs had burst open. I saw utter, unimaginable devastation all around me. To escape the unbearable heat of the fire and to relieve their terrible pain, hundreds of burnt children threw themselves into the school swimming pool in Hiroshima and died in the water.
One of the tens of thousands injured in August 1945 in Hiroshima, severe burns all over the back, head, arms. 1972-03-31, by the government of Hiroshima Prefecture, via Wikimedia Commons public domain.
On that fateful day, the 6th of August 1945, some 8,400 7th and 8th graders were mobilized in the center of Hiroshima. They were supposed to help clean up the scars of war.
Almost all of them were incinerated and vaporized without leaving a trace, and even more died within days. In this wise, my age group in the city was almost wiped out. Setsuko Thurlow, 13 years old. This is how Setsuko Thurlow remembers it, who has dedicated her life to the abolition of nuclear weapons and accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for Icahn in 2017. Fujio Tsujimoto was 5 years old and at a school playground in Nagasaki with his grandmother. He heard the approaching bomber aircraft and managed to reach what was probably the best protected place in a shelter with his grandmother when the atomic bomb detonated. Fujio described his experiences. I found human beings scattered all over the playground. The ground was almost completely covered with corpses. Most of them looked dead and were lying still. But here and there, some were moving their legs or raising their arms. Those who could still move came crawling into the shelter. Soon the shelter was overcrowded with wounded people. The whole city around the school was in flames. My brother and sisters arrived too late at the shelter, so they were burned and were crying. Half an hour later, my mother finally appeared. She was covered in blood. I will never forget how happy I was as I clung to my mother. We waited and waited for father, but he never came. My younger sister died the next day. My mother also died the next day. And then my older brother. I thought I would also die, because the human beings around me, lying side by side in the shelter, were dying one after the other.
Fujio Tsujimoto, for years. The survivors developed fever and bleeding gums, hair loss, vomiting, and diarrhea, symptoms of acute radiation syndrome. In addition, they suffered unbearable pain from severe burns, broken bones, skin wounds, glass shards embedded deep in the flesh, and wound infections. Many children waited for days for medical treatment. At many treatment sites, doctors treated those with less serious injuries first because they had a greater chance of survival. More than a few said they envied the dead. The ICANN report states.
Of those who survived, some were so disfigured that babies broke down in tears at the sight of them. Copyright Onuka Masami, Asahi Shimbun, 1952 Nyen Bayue Liuri Hao, via Wikimedia Commons Public Domain.
The corpses were burned in makeshift crematoria, sometimes 20 or more at a time. There were so many dead people that it was impossible not to step on them. It was terrible. Some of them had no heads left. Yoshiko Kajimoto, 2 years old.
The dead brother was cremated.
This boy, carrying his brother on his back, waits in front of the crematorium for the small body to be cremated. Copyright Joe O'Donnell, U.S. Marine Corps, via Wikimedia Commons Public Domain.
I saw a boy of about 10 years old walking by. He was carrying a baby on his back. The little head was tilted back as if the baby were fast asleep. In those days, you often saw children in Japan playing with their little brothers or sisters on their backs, but this boy was clearly different. I could see that he had come to this place for a serious reason. He was not wearing shoes. His face was hard. The boy stood there for 5 or 10 minutes. The men with the white masks went over to him and began quietly removing the rope that held the baby. At that moment I saw that the baby was already dead. The men held the body by the hands and feet and laid it on the fire. The boy stood there without moving, looking into the flames. He bit his lower lip so hard that it glistened with blood. The flame burned weakly like the setting sun. The boy turned around and walked away in silence.
Joe O'Donnell, U.S. Marine Corps photographer. The ICANN report is illustrated with photos and drawings, many of which are just as horrific or touching as the oral descriptions. One photo, for example, shows the completely devastated playground of a school in Nagasaki. There are skull bones and scattered remains of children lying around. The remains of the small bodies were pulverized. The mother of 13-year-old Shigeru Oriman recognized her child because she found his metal lunchbox, which she had given to her son that morning. Next to it lay the burnt remains of her child's bones. Many children were never found.
Nagasaki, 10th August 1945. A mother waits with her injured baby for treatment. Some mothers ran out of milk after the atomic bomb exploded, and the ration milk supplies were quickly used up. They then begged other breastfeeding mothers to help them out. Copyright Yamahata Yosuke, Fanhei, Chi Jenyun Dong. Janshu Jue Ding Ban Cheng Chi Yuan Bao Shi Genji Mian Cheng Chu Ban. 2008 Artue, ISBN 978, du Chara Passage Origins to 209, via Wikimedia Commons Public Domain.
Thousands of survivors, called hibakusha in Japanese, were orphaned. They wandered around on their own. Some ended up in one of the overcrowded orphanages, were handed over to relatives or social services, or eked out an existence as laborers. Others fell into the clutches of criminals, were forced into prostitution, fell ill or committed suicide. A teacher who helped out at a school that had been converted into an orphanage described the conditions there. Many of the children became thinner and thinner from constant diarrhea. Most of them eventually died, and their bodies were burned in a corner of the schoolyard. Wild dogs then scavenged the bones. Every day, worried parents visited the center to find their children. But there were very few reunions. When there were, the other children watched with envy. Yoshie. Tomasu, teacher Aikan, reminds us that almost all countries on Earth have committed to protecting children in armed conflicts. Compared to adults, their skin is thinner, their bodies are less resilient, and they are more sensitive to radiation.
You remain silent. What do you think, and what do you say about it? Those in charge, who instigate and order such things, as well as those who follow their orders and commit these crimes, will never be held accountable for them, but will instead be praised by like-minded people in their clique and by sections of the population that support them.
This is outrageous, and it is in no wise understandable that those responsible for ordering and for causing or executing such atrocities, which are also war crimes, are not held accountable, as you say.
Unfortunately, this is common practice here on Earth among the majority of Earthlings.
I have no knowledge of these horrific war events, because I have never dealt with the past history of earthly humanity, so I am not so extensively informed that I...
Could I help you out and tell you something here and there if you are interested?
My area of responsibility is completely different from dealing with the history of Earth and its humanity. But there is nothing to prevent you from explaining some things to me if the opportunity arises, because it is indeed also in my interest to be able to integrate some more into my knowledge.
Then my word that I will expand your knowledge a bit. But look here. I have another article from the Infosperber about what the public media do not report on because they depend on the goodwill of certain politicians and, above all, those in government, and only report in their media what is allowed to them in terms of lies, omissions, and falsehoods, and what benefits them in the form of a believing readership. This is contrary to what the Infosperber does, where it talks straight and says what needs to be said, and that the readership is truly and truthfully informed. This Infosperber platform can only be maintained because it is completely politically independent, and the whole thing can only be run with voluntary donations. It is explained as follows, which I take the liberty of openly calling it as Infosperber proclaims it.
Topic-related vested interest of the author. No translations using DeepL. Such articles are only possible thanks to your donations. Donations to our foundation are tax-deductible. Opinions in Infosperber articles correspond to the personal assessments of the author. Further information. The original Icahn report, The Impact of Nuclear Weapons on Children, in English, also deals with the effects of nuclear bomb tests on children. Infosperber from 2.8. 2024. Military spending reaches new high. Infosperber from 24.4. 2024. Horror video from the Ukraine front belongs in the public domain. Info Sperber from 2.8. 2023. War surgery, disfigured faces, destroyed bodies.
The fact that you are bringing this up here is like a kind of advertising. But I think that can be allowed because just what the previous article, Tactical Atomic Bombs, and their cruel consequences calls facts justifies everything.
I also think so, which is why I think that I'm allowed to say what has been said and thus, so to speak, advertise, as you call it. But now read here what Info Sperber brings in this article.
Info Sperber sees what others miss. 13.8. 2024.
A fire is burning between the Israeli and Palestinian flags. Copyright BrazilNet/deposit photos.
The genocide in Gaza or the bankruptcy of Western values. Arne Strohmeyer, 13th of August 2024. The Middle East is on the brink of disaster. Israel's politicians and military have lost all inhibitions. A book describes the barbarism.
The author is a journalist and book author who is critical of Zionism. He is basing this on the new book by Johannes Zhang, No Land in Sight. Gaza between occupation, blockade, and war. Western weapons for the big reckoning with the axis of evil. The Middle East is on the brink of disaster. Israel's politicians and military have lost all inhibitions. In the Gaza Strip, Israel's politicians and military have committed genocide and are in the process of continuing it, probably with the aim of finally driving the remaining Palestinians out of the Strip and also out of the West Bank. A new ethnic cleansing is therefore in full swing. In addition, the Israelis have killed leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah in violation of international law, and in doing so are deliberately risking the Great War, which the Zionists hope will solve all the region's problems in their favor. The West, that is the US, the EU, and especially Germany, are loyally behind Israel and are even supplying weapons for the great reckoning with the axis of evil, Iran and its allies. Iran is supposed to accept Israeli murder on its own soil. In this highly dangerous situation, the German foreign minister is not accusing the arsonist Israel, but the victim. The mullah state is supposed to moderate and restrain. Iran, a proud nation, is supposed to accept the Zionist activities on its territory. The assassination of Hamas leader Haniyeh was not the first on Iranian soil without objection. Sancta Simplicitas. The West has never undertaken any peace initiatives worthy of the name, neither in the past nor at present. Israel was allowed to get away with it, and on top of that, it was supported by all means to enforce its violent policy, and now the great Armageddon is at risk. A people should give up their existence in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. If you want to understand all this moral and inhuman madness, you should read the new book by Johannes Zhang, No Land in Sight? Gaza between occupation, blockade, and war. The author, who knows Israel and the occupied territories very well because he spent many years there, describes in short, concise chapters the tragedy that resulted from the creation of the Zionist state, the brutal expulsion, oppression, and occupation of an entire people, who are apparently being forced to finally give up their existence in Palestine, especially in the Gaza Strip and also in the West Bank. The author also does not spare the Palestinians in his descriptions, and describes their differences, contradictions, and outbreaks of violence among themselves, in an unbiased and realistic way. Recent allegations of genocide for ethnic, religious, or political motives, UPG. Several countries consider the following conflicts to be acts of genocide. However, the UN International Court of Justice has not yet confirmed genocide in any of these cases. 1. Genocide against the Yazidis. 2014 to 2017, the Islamic State committed serious crimes against the Yazidi community in Iraq and Syria, including mass killings, sexual enslavement of women and girls, and forced conversions. Thousands were killed, and many more were forced to flee. 2. Genocide against the Uyghurs. 2017 to present, the Chinese government is accused of conducting a systematic campaign against Uyghur Muslims, including mass internment in so-called re-education camps, forced labor, forced sterilization, the destruction of cultural sites and family separations. 3. Tigray Genocide, 2020. To date, the conflict began in November 2020 between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF). The war escalated, and there were reports of ethnic cleansing, mass killings, sexual violence, and the use of hunger as a weapon. 4. Rohingya Genocide 2017 to present, the Muslim minority in Myanmar has been severely persecuted. In 2017, the military carried out a brutal offensive that led to massacres, widespread rape, and the destruction of entire villages. Hundreds of thousands fled to neighboring Bangladesh. 5. Genocide against Palestinians in Gaza 2023 to present, the ongoing military attacks, the destruction of infrastructure, and the extreme humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip amount to the systematic destruction of a people. Several members of the Israeli government have stated their intention to expel Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. Israel's destruction of the Gaza Strip goes far beyond the right to self-defense. In the case of Palestinians in Gaza, on 26 January 2024, the UN International Court of Justice ordered the following interim measures to be applied to Israel. Israel shall refrain from measures in terms of the UN Genocide Convention, prevent and punish direct and public incitement to genocide, take immediate and effective measures to ensure the provision of humanitarian aid to the civilian population in Gaza. Imbalance of power, but the conflict between the two peoples has been too asymmetrical from the very beginning for one to speak of a confrontation between two sides of equal strength. In realizing their settlement project, the Zionists have always had the political and military upper hand, thanks to the support of the imperialist powers, first Great Britain and then the United States. Seen in this light, the other side never had a chance. The Zionists took advantage of this opportunity with unscrupulousness, and therefore also successfully asserted themselves. But they are not on the side of justice and morality. Israel is a pariah state today, which, apart from the Western community of values, hardly enjoys any trust in the world. One cannot accuse the author of one-sidedness. He repeatedly tries to do justice to the Israeli side as well, examining their arguments, wanting to respond to them and understand them. But the enormous burden of the injustice that the Zionist state has done and continues to do to the Palestinians in the past forces him again and again to take the side of the Palestinians in their just struggle for self-determination, equality, justice, and human dignity. So many Palestinian civilians can be sacrificed for one Hamas fighter. The above could be substantiated with many examples from the book. But one example is particularly revealing and shocking because it exposes the brutality of the Israeli approach in the Gaza Strip and explains why the death toll is reaching such terrible heights. The Israeli army is apparently using AI in its ruthless killing. This technology helps to precisely create the targets. Zhang writes, citing Israeli sources, "The research reveals the ratio that the army was willing to accept. For every Hamas fighter at the lower levels of the hierarchy, it was permissible to kill up to 15 or 20 civilians. But for a Hamas battalion commander, it was more than 100 civilians." To eliminate Ayman Nofal, the Hamas commander of the Gaza Center Brigade, on 17 October 2023, the army gave the green light to kill about 300 civilians. This information is very consistent with the daily news from the theater of war. Super weapons against flying garbage cans. It is no secret that Israel is one of the world's leading producers of armaments and security technology, and that it uses its wars to test newly developed superweapons and then export them as field-tested. The Palestinians, and Hamas in particular, have no way of countering such a superiority of hyper-modern killing techniques. The Israeli military refers to their homemade rockets as flying garbage cans. The West is characterized by silence and looking away. In the epilogue of his book, Zhang settles scores with the Middle East policy of the West, and thus also of Germany. These states pride themselves on representing universally valid values. But as defenders of Israeli policy, they are in fact supporting the law of the jungle. Human rights, the Geneva Convention, international humanitarian law, the UN Charter, all of them non-issues. The author concludes, instead of working towards the end of the military occupation, Germany, France, Great Britain, and the United States, indeed the entire community of states, at least the Western one, have virtually encouraged Israel to continue down the path of colonization, expropriation, and oppression through their silence and turning a blind eye. Impunity was, so to speak, guaranteed. The Gaza war has further polarized the political fronts in Germany. Anyone expressing sympathy for the Palestinian cause, calling for an end to the war, and demanding human rights and self-determination for this people must expect to be denounced as an anti-Semite. It is worth repeating here once again because it is so incredible. In Germany, standing up for human rights leads to accusations of anti-Semitism. What an infamous perversion, and what a false conclusion from the Holocaust, even. Critical Jews are denounced as anti-Semites. Zhang describes in detail how this perversion continues in the German media and has become established as an ideological position. The leading media, almost without exception, defend Israel's disastrous political course. In the talk shows, only the repeaters of Israeli politics can be seen. Critical Jews who represent universalist positions have hardly any access. These too are already being labeled as anti-Semites. What a cynical presumption! Germans who do not like certain Jews denounce them as anti-Semites. The loser in these McCarthy-like campaigns is the core element of democracy, freedom of expression and information. The Islamic and Arab world has lost faith in Western values. The German politicians who stand behind Israel have to listen to the Israeli journalist Amira Hass. Zhang quotes her at length, saying that with their loyalty to the occupying and apartheid state of Israel, they have betrayed the responsibility that grew out of the Holocaust. And the Egyptian Mohammed el-Baradei, the former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, writes to the West, and thus also to the Germans, in the family album. Furthermore, the Arab and Muslim world has lost confidence in supposedly Western norms, such as international law and international institutions, human rights, and democratic values. In their view, the West itself demonstrates that brute force is above all. Without a radical reform of the international order, the Gaza war will be a harbinger of a world out of control. The Western and German view of Israel and the Middle East, as well as the role that these states play there, urgently needs to be corrected. They have committed themselves to the wrong values there and are also defending them with extreme violence.
This confirms what you often say when we discuss such things, where you often mention the fact that America has been the model for all the wrong things that have happened on Earth since this country came into existence. War, all discord, murder, destruction, and annihilation. This is also seen in the case of the apparent President Zelensky in Ukraine, who only occupies his position at the behest of America's leaders and is controlled and manipulated by them according to their will. This is also in the attitude of Ms. Likewise, what I also found in her attitude is that she is willing to continue to maintain America's hegemonic aspirations and thereby irresponsibly further promote the war in Ukraine with immense financial contributions and arms deliveries. America's secretive, underhanded hegemonic behavior is also present in this woman's attitude, which is to be understood in the context of President Biden's arrangement of the Ukrainian army's warlike incursion into Russian territory in connection with the hegemonic behavior. However, this is absurdly linked to the lying behavior of all Democrats who allegedly want peace but are promoting the war in Ukraine, which is secretly ordered and directed by America, to which weapons are also being supplied irresponsibly in the hope of fulfilling the hope of hegemony. The same is happening in the Middle East, where the completely degenerate mass murderer Netanyahu has the audacity to exterminate the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip through the Israeli army, which so far, contrary to false official statements, has already killed 48,476 human beings. In addition to which a further 21,604 human beings were murdered incidentally by the Israeli military, who were deemed to be special Hamas fighters.
As usual. However, everything is twisted or denied, as only half the truth is told, and thus the world population is led by the nose and lied to and cheated in every which way, as is the case in every war. In this way, all the war crimes committed by the Israeli army and Hamas are also played down. It is the same as in Ukraine, only in a different way, where on the one hand the mad warmonger Zelensky, under the patronage of the Americans, orders war crimes and glosses over them with lies as big as his fist, whereby everything evil and unjust is done in a devious way to make a pig of Russia on behalf of America's delusion of hegemony. This while Putin is waging a vengeful war that could have been avoided if he had reasonably turned to the world's population and its leaders for help against America's request to bring NATO into Ukraine. But America's rulers have been world-famous liars and cheats since time immemorial, and are also known for political murders and criminal murders, that is to say, death penalty, as well as election murders, etc., but that is normal for America. This, as particularly in this country, lying and cheating in government, and among its big shots is the ultimate, although worldwide, lying and cheating are only surpassed before elections and in wars. But when it comes to the war in Ukraine, it can be said with a clear conscience, America, or rather, its leaders, are to blame. And when America and guilt are mentioned, It is not the righteous part of the people that is meant, who has nothing to do with all the crooked, unjust, murderous, lying, fraudulent, and otherwise criminal machinations of the U.S. government, the U.S. military, the secret services, and their supporters. This righteous part of the American people is absolutely excluded from any insult or blame in any case. Well, the whole world knows that America lied and cheated when it was said that there would be no NATO expansion eastwards from Europe. NATO, which stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is still led by the USA to this day, although the Soviet Union was the leading power of the Warsaw Pact until the alliance was dissolved in 1991. Whether the leaders of these countries would have reacted correctly if Putin had sought their help is questionable, because as a result of all the chronic lying and cheating by America, the state leaders are taken in by America and are America-friendly, unfortunately to this day. So it is very questionable whether Putin would have received help and the war could have been avoided. When I think that many countries in the world are friendly to America and NATO because they are not aware that America is always driven by the pursuit of hegemony, it would have been possible to avoid the war because Trump was president at the time, who, as you told me months ago, unlike this Kamala Harris, who wants to become president in America, allegedly wants to end the war in Ukraine. Whether it comes to that and becomes true or untrue, that remains to be seen when.
Yes, that is right. That was and is his attitude, which I have fathomed, but what happens over time, that
is also clear to me, and
unfortunately that is the way it is, and nothing can be changed about it. What you said earlier about Putin is logical, but whether the further logic of assistance would have arisen from it, and the war could have been avoided is actually questionable, because as we play are and have known for a long time, it is extremely rare to find a leader in an earthly state who does not effectively bring his personal allures, views and desires, as well as his actions, ideas, conceptions, and own politics of injustice into his meat and does more harm than good and positive. As a rule, all evil is provoked, right up to war, and even to a new world war, which is already looming, if reason does not prevail after all. In Israel, for example, Netanyahu's secret ambition is to carry out genocide in the Middle East, as you openly mentioned months ago, and you spread it worldwide on the internet through the Conversation report and made it known. This has not caused any reaction in the state leadership forces or among the peoples of all states in general. Consequently, not a single letter has been written about it in the media, nor has anything been published, and only now is the InfoSperber portal using this term for the first time and openly explaining what is going on in Gaza in this regard, and thus speaking of genocide. Genocide, which is based on Netanyahu's secret intentions, who not only denies it lyingly, but is effectively doing everything criminal to realize his idea of hatred against the Arabs, whereby he also includes Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Iraq in this idea. This is due to his delusion of hatred against the Arab world and his megalomania that he is absolutely invincible and, moreover, a chosen one of YHWH to protect and defend Israel against the infidels. This, in addition to the fact that he also lives in the delusion that he is invincible, consequently he also includes genocide in his delusion, hopefully pondering that at least America, with its delusion of hegemony, will stand by him, probably because America hopes that one day Israel will also become a satellite state of America. This, in addition to the fact that Germany is also helping, practically with a guilty conscience, as compensation for what the completely dehumanized Nazi henchmen of Hitler's dictatorship did in the last World War by carrying out the Holocaust. But, as you are accustomed to saying, not all that glitters is gold, because all manner of evil is also fermenting in Germany itself, although the people are being promised, both lyingly and fraudulently, that war will never again break out over Germany. But this danger does exist, because the wrong actions of that part of the neo-Nazis in the government, who are bullying other parties, respectively a certain one, which is countering the false and dishonest actions of the neo-Nazis, is leading to very unpleasant things. What is really and truly being done is nothing more than lies and blatant fraud, because the majority of the state leadership, the neo-Nazis, of whom certain lowly intelligent parts do not even know that they have a neo-Nazi attitude, are unconsciously doing everything they can to provoke a war and make it a reality. This is mainly done by supplying all kinds of help, money, and weapons to the war fanatics and to Zelensky, who is being bullied by America. On the one hand, because Zelensky, as a Jew, is our rag for anti-Semites anyway, but this is not considered by the part of the German government, especially not by the part of the neo-Nazi state leadership, which consists of parts of such neo-Nazis, who, as you often say, hypocritically pose as do-gooders and friends of Israel, who, however, harbor and cultivate an anti-Semitic attitude, are friendly towards Netanyahu. This is partly because they have fallen prey to the delusion that this will enable them to distract and hide their true and evil Nazi nature from the people. But what this brings is fear, hatred, and unrest, as well as the danger of riot, insurrection, rebellion, and, indeed, the danger of war, which can quickly degenerate into another world war, as we Plejaren assess what is coming. This is partly because anti-Semitism is once again developing very strongly in an already existing sequence, and this again threatens the emergence of a new Holocaust, the basic features of which have already been planned and are being further developed. And it is becoming more and more apparent that, as a result of the mass murder leader Netanyahu, parts of the people and settlers in Israel are already adopting and imitating the evil and negative ways of the evil hatred of Palestinians.
You were already talking about this months ago when we were discussing with Bermunda, Florina, and Injana. Also about the fact that you were of the opinion that any kind of death penalty is nothing more than murder. Even if it is anchored in the laws of the states and applied in accordance with the law, and no matter whether it is applied militarily, under constitutional or civil law, privately, or in any other way. Therefore, all death penalty is and remains murder, regardless of the form of permission and the method of execution. And every human being who advocates it is complicit in every such murder, regardless of whether he is thousands of kilometers away and whether it is committed by law, by military, or by private means. I can never and will never condone murder of any kind or war, which is nothing more than military murder. Although every human being has the right to defend themselves, they also do not have to consciously murder in self-defense, because there may often be a way to defend oneself that does not end fatally. But if killing should nevertheless result from the act of self-defense, then it is to be understood that this is not an act of murder.
Your thinking, actions, and behavior should be that of all Earth humans. Then there would be peace on Earth. But I want to ask you why you wrote Palestinian again, as we have established, since this is wrong, because it is actually Palestinian as we have known since time immemorial, and our spelling is also used correctly.
Earthlings always think they know better, so I just used the incorrect earthly spelling again. Christian has also already pointed this out to me, and so from now on I will use the correct term again and omit the incorrect N.
Good. If you correct the term, then that is that.
While we are already changing the term, I think we can also discuss the High Council right away. But I do not want to write it down openly when I recall our conversation. So let us hear what is going on.
I see. It should be so. I have the following to say and explain, period.
Good. Then it is probably time for me to answer a question that was sent to me that refers to the 7 universes and their 7 dimensions of creation, and to these themselves, namely what these are in detail. Regarding the 7 dimensions and 7 universes, however, it still needs to be explained that false claims are being taught worldwide in this regard, and that accordingly there are many false explanations, what they actually are. The creation is also presented in a similarly false way, although it itself is nothing more than natural existence, which we human beings call nature, and...
But before you start, Before you give your explanation, I would like you to mention a few things that are important to say as clear preliminary information, because what is to be explained should ultimately be taken in as knowledge and stored in the memory. Therefore, I want to mention your article from 1946, which I read in Svath's Annals, which you should retrieve and which should be shown to advantage, and which shows how important it is that what is to be remembered as knowledge is also correctly understood, absorbed, and stored. To do that, you, as a boy not even 10 years old, wrote down one of Svath's teachings that I read, and that you are now supposed to retrieve and reproduce here. I think that would be important.
Whatever you say, maybe it really is important. By way of explanation, I would like to say that this article, which I am to retrieve from the memory banks, was based on the teaching that I had learned from Svath. I had already written it in 1946 under his supervision, which my teacher Karl Graf then also corrected for me. Now, however, I do not know where to retrieve it, because I do not know the annals of Svath, which is why I need your help. Sure. Then I will get to work and retrieve everything, even if at present science does not yet know the practice of the value and the concepts of implicating and the explicit, etc., or does not openly deal with it. This is not considered important, and in any case is not yet openly dealt with in this field of knowledge at this present time. Probably, as Svath says, this will only be the case in the new, and so in the second millennium, and consequently only then will this field of knowledge be openly known. Now, what I want to explain is based on the fundamentals of conscious and effective work of correct, independent, and non-religious thinking, so that the result will be to see and understand everything clearly and to judge everything and everyone, without any religious or secular belief, in an absolutely neutral way, and to grasp the effective truth from it. Consequently, at the time of the year 1946, as I write this, scientifically not even with regard to the explicit and the implicit, because these terms are only used by Svath and me, and will only be in the mouths of scientists, etc. in the future, when the time for it has come. This is namely when the understanding of the averagely educated human being on Earth has developed to the level required for this. Furthermore, what I am talking about is currently not even known or researched to a large extent and in general outline, namely the values of implications, especially with regard to the implicit and the implicating. However, implicit knowledge will become more and more important for human beings on Earth in the future, and in over 60 years' time it will be described as an exciting concept. In particular, it will then lead to considerations as to whether and which valuable implications will arise, and this very specifically for the future of emerging vocational education, which will then be aligned with it. In the future, implicit or incorporated knowledge will educate a human being much more than he is able to verbalize or put into words. Thus, he may be able to demonstrate his various abilities, but he cannot explain them either halfway or completely through words, gestures, or writing. Nevertheless, the human being in question is able to act much better than the people around him would expect or assume based on the knowledge they have of him. Implicit knowledge is basically knowledge that a human being has personally acquired and stored in his or her memory. At the same time, implicit knowledge can be both context-oriented and situation-dependent, which also results in routinization or skill or good dexterity, which arises from the totality of what has been learned and is absolutely conscious. However, the whole can also be implicitly absorbed through unconscious perception and learning, but in this case, it does not attract conscious attention and remains unbroken or is not consciously absorbed and therefore remains unreflected. By contrast, however, implicit knowledge can unconsciously influence, control or guide actions, whereby implicit knowledge is particularly valuable when gaining experience, for example on the job, etc. Implicit knowledge from different sectors or fields of knowledge, respectively, can have very complex structures, but also errors, which can only be corrected in the way that a verbalization of the implicit knowledge can be carried out, and thus a reflection can also be achieved. With regard to the behavior of human beings, it can be assumed that, in addition to explicit knowledge, A knowledge of social behavior is also characterized by a high proportion of valuable implicit knowledge. This is knowledge about behavior that relates to interaction with other human beings. Knowledge about social behavior is expressed, for example, in dealing with people, nature and flora and fauna, or in leadership skills with regard to human beings, as well as in intercultural or other skills, and in the ability to resolve conflicts. Implicitly acquired knowledge, such as social behavior, can be very person-related, namely experience-bound, culturally or through a certain contextualization, respectively through guiding circumstances or relationships, but also through sequences of thoughts. For learning processes in schools, the promotion of implicit knowledge is only a secondary result, whereas for complex personal self-development, an implicit learning process and a systematically controlled and reflected promotion of personal agency is very useful. The promotion of action-oriented explicit knowledge should always be at the forefront, in connection with a complete action in the feedback from doing to perceiving and thinking to a conscious verbalization, or verbalization of the actions of human beings. This can take place, for example, in the form of a technical discussion with a human being who is knowledgeable in this regard, whereby feedback processes from doing to perceiving and thinking and action-oriented learning should also be emphasized, in such a way that theory is used as the explicit knowledge to control and reflect on action. Learning should take place in multiple contexts and perspectives, whereby consolidation and flexibilization of learning are acquired and explicit knowledge is promoted. The acquisition of tacit knowledge is thus indirectly associated with and reinforces the accumulation of experiences of the learning human being, which is achieved through self-directed learning. In addition to tacit knowledge, absolute personal competence is particularly important for explicit knowledge, because this can be verbalized and is absolutely independent of the person, and also independent of the situation, which means that it can be personally determined. This is particularly evident within the professional competence or knowledge regarding a specific field, and the didactic competence or the skill of imparting knowledge. In the case of so-called social competence, in addition to explicit competence, a very high proportion of implicit knowledge must be present. So that is my article according to the teachings of Svath, what I just learned, and then also wrote the article. Explaining this is so far the most important thing in order to understand that what has been explained is only useful if it is implicitly or respectively inserted and stored. And furthermore, implicit true knowledge has the value that it becomes rational and leads to prudence and reason. Now, however, the question and answer should follow, to which I now have the following to explain. The creation as such is fundamentally purest nature, purest energy and power in the form of all existence of the existing, of the organic and inorganic existence of all forms of appearance of the totality of all life forms of all genera and species, such as human beings, plants, animals, creatures and other living creatures on land, in the air, in water, in rocks and in minerals, etc., down to bacilli, viruses and microbes and other microorganisms, and on the surfaces of planets, water, stars and asteroids, as well as dust clouds, etc. In terms of the energy of creation, all living beings, according to their genus or species, have physical and purely biological peculiarities, idiosyncrasies, creatures and other diverse life forms, which decisively shape their spontaneous behavior or the like. Thus, in view of their diversity, all have certain typical characteristics and peculiarities, depending on how some have a combative nature, how other genera and species are absolutely peaceful, and how others have peculiar characteristics and are fundamentally of a completely different nature. In nature, or creation respectively, nothing is ever left useless. Everything is inseparably destined for a particular purpose, belonging to the essence of something, because that is the nature of creation. And so it is, as human beings say, in the nature of things, that everything has its purpose. This means that everything is natural, original and inherent in creation, and thus the natural state of something, namely of nature, which according to this can only ever be pure, genuine, and therefore not artificial, even when human beings produce something artificially. Because the basic material is and remains fundamentally, and in any case, always a product that is brought forth from the energy and power of creation. Creation consists of pure energy and power, which is capable of creating and evolving. And consequently, it develops further and ever higher and is equipped with its own consciousness, which is capable of independently evolving and constantly developing itself higher. This happens as creation itself constantly evolves, managing, strengthening, and affirming, and implying and including knowledge and knowing. This implicit knowledge of creation is a hidden side of knowledge for human beings on Earth, and that in contrast to their explicit knowledge, which is familiar to them and is a knowledge that they can, for example, consciously verbalize or express in new words and correct through reflection, but can also successfully shape through corresponding action, but also, in addition to explicit knowledge, through their implicit knowledge. This is, so to speak, a hidden side of knowledge that works together with and is built on explicit knowledge. However, the human being is unable or finds it difficult to express the whole thing in words. But if I am now to explain further what the cosmos is, how it and creation became, then I can explain it as follows. The visible cosmos is not the whole universe, because in truth it is only 1/7 of the universe of creation, which consists of neutral energy and power as omnipresence, and thus as all-encompassing nature. Creation as such is the comprehensive existence of nature and everything that exists at all, which means that it exists in its entirety in all organic and inorganic forms through its energy and power, and is evolving inexorably, respectively developing ever higher, having emerged from the being absolutum via the absolute's absolutum. This is without any help from human beings, and without any imaginary fantasized god of any religious or other favor. Creation exists as a finite space universe, endless for us human beings, of which there are, however, 7, because creation itself consists of 7 universes in the endless realm of nihilo, or non-space, of nothing, which in endless duration is infinity, which human beings cannot grasp intellectually. Besides this creation, countless other creations exist at the most diverse stages of evolution, which were created by the being absolute, or via the absolute absolutum, and continue to evolve until they're changed to the next stage of evolution, as is the case in the course of evolution and the existence of all forms of creation. The 7 universes of creation are within itself, thus within its own being, respectively within its own existence of its total space, independent of each other but still interwoven, whereby 7 universes exist in the same space of the entire creation, interwoven with each other and only separated from each other as a result of their different basic dimensions, and thus each of the 7 universes is independent and does not affect any other. In order to explain this in an understandable way that is also effective, it is explained as follows. In a very large glass of clear water, 1 drop each of a water-soluble color is poured in, such as green, blue, red, yellow, violet, black, brown, which mix with the clear water so finely that none of their presence can be seen or otherwise determined. The color drops mix with the clear water in such a way that the individual colors are present in their value, but do not interfere with each other and remain separate in their dilution. This then is the same as the 7 different dimensions of the 7 universes of creation, which do indeed flow into each other, but are absolutely independent and do not affect each other. Creation thus consists of 7 levels, of 7 universes, each with 7 different dimensions, with each universe having its own material belt, respectively, its own cosmos, which expands relentlessly and renews itself after 49 billion years. As a result of the constant movement of expansion and the associated becoming and passing away, everything in the cosmos, which as a material belt is only 7th part of the one universe, changes inexorably, whose total size and vastness can be described as immeasurable for human understanding. Now it should be further explained that the creation in its full totality in itself, and thus in its total space, not only shows 7 equally large universes encompassing the whole space of creation, and these are separated from each other, as it were, with their own dimensions, and therefore do not affect each other in any way, but that each universe shows 7 energy belts. So each universe in the space of creation consists of 7 energy levels, which means that each creation universe has 7 energy belts within it, each of which encompasses an area around the space of creation, whereby, in each universe, Exactly the fourth belt forms the matter belt, or the cosmos, in terms of sequence. The universe is egg-shaped and therefore also contains the visible cosmos, which exists as the fourth level, with 3 energy belts in front of it. Just as 3 further energy belts or space levels follow after the visible cosmos, so that 7 energy levels or space belts respectively form the respective universe of the egg-shaped creation space. Thus, creation contains within itself 7 universes, each of which has a different dimension from any other universe in creation, although they are all in the same space of creation. However, due to their different dimension, they do not touch each other in any tangible way. In truth, these 7 different and thus differently polarized dimensions of the 7 universes of creation cannot flow into one another in such a way that they would touch. But they can be technically broken through, which, however, requires a highly developed futuristic technology. This is to create a complete equalization of the dimensional energy of the respective universes, which then makes it possible for flying apparatus and materials, for example, as well as human beings, life forms, to pass from one universe into another universe of the same creation, such as the Plejarin from their Ankar universe into our Dern universe, as the Plejarin call these 2 universes. The same applies when, for example, you switch from our creation to the DAL universe of the sister universe, where members of the Plejarin Federation had already settled tens of thousands of years ago. The same processes have to be fulfilled if you want to enter another and foreign creation, but so far the Plejarin have only succeeded in doing so once. And with that, I have actually explained what should be explained.
But that will raise new questions.
I know, but the whole thing that I have explained should actually suffice. Besides, it is not part of the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, by which humans on Earth are to learn to become truthful and righteous human beings with logical thinking, intellect, and reason, who also strive for true love and true peace. Therefore, if I say and explain this and that regarding other things, then this has nothing to do with the teaching and is only incidental. The human being who is learning the teaching should concern himself with the teaching and his personal learning, and only incidentally, if there is an interest in it, should he concern himself with other things, but I am not available, or only very rarely, to provide answers and explanations when it comes to anything other than the teaching.
That is clear. And now I would like to discuss something with you that is private.